Okay, great. Well, welcome to our webinar on getting the most out of your cloud-based ATS with deep learning AI. If you have a question for our panelists, please put it in the chat and we will have time at the end to answer all your questions. This webinar is recorded in case you miss any part of it and want to watch it later. And hello, my name is Will Staney, founder and CEO at Proactive Talent. We are an agile talent acquisition services company. Essentially, we are a flexible RPO that helps our clients from consulting to execution when it comes to attracting, hiring, and retaining talent. We do everything from employer branding to on-demand recruiting and technology implementations, including implementing Greenhouse and Eightfold, which we're excited to talk about today. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists and actually let them introduce themselves. Jon, we'll go ahead and start with you. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Great. Hi there. I'm Jon Stross. I'm co-founder and president of Greenhouse Software. Thanks for having me on, and thanks to everybody for coming today. We're an applicant tracking system that works with Eightfold and many other companies. And I should also say I'm a published author. We wrote a book called Talent Makers that's all about companies making this transition to becoming great at hiring.
Thanks. Awesome. Thanks, Jon. Lahia.
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much for having me. Lehi Zamora, Chief Marketing Officer at Eightfold. We are the providers of the leading single talent intelligence platform that helps unlocks talent data for your candidates, employees, contractors, and citizens. That's in your ATS. So happy to be here.
Awesome. And my friend and former client, and actually a client of all of us here on this panel, Mr. SteFan.
Hi, yeah, glad to be here. SteFan PremDas. I lead talent operations at Noom. We're a behavioral change company, most kind of notably known for weight loss, but also are entering a bunch of different areas recently. Recently started with the company, but as I mentioned before, big fan of Eightfold, Proactive, and Greenhouse, so happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for joining us today. It's going to be a really fun conversation, right up with topics that I really care about, strategy, process, but also technology and emerging technology that's coming. The simple fact is that it's getting, I don't have to tell you guys, it's getting very competitive out there, right? With things that are going on in the market right now, a lot of the chess pieces have shifted, right? And that competition for talent isn't going away. And in order to succeed, I mean, we know that our hiring needs to succeed. And so, just like your organization needs to get the most out of your physical assets and your employees, you need to get the most out of your hiring process, right? And, a metaphor I typically utilize is sort of like a car on a road, right? You're going on a journey. The technology used is that car, right? And whether you're using, a beatable Ford or a Cadillac, it is that strategy and that process that is your road, right? And so, this is a very strategic goal, for your organization. And it's one of the things that isn't always driven by the C-suite, as our panelists and my former client, SteFan, will prove, right? Achieving this goal is made possible by investing in the right technology. And that takes building the right strategy and process to get the most out of it. And then the combination of that strategic intention and the execution of that process with leading technology can really put your organization in a position to outmaneuver your competition, so that you can succeed now, but also take a proactive approach to succeed in the future, right? And so if we've learned anything about this past year, the future can be pretty uncertain, right? So plans change quickly. So you need to be ready for what's next in your industry, in your world, in the talent market, right? And so you need to hire for what's next, and you need technology that's ready for what's next. So over the next 45 minutes or so, we're going to dive deep into what's happening now and in the immediate future, and let our expert panelists describe just how you can address these very challenges. So with that, let's just dive right in. If you guys are ready. Ready? Okay, great. So, what is going on in the talent market that makes it so important to have the right technology and to get the most out of it now more than ever? Lahia?
Yeah, sure. I think, as you mentioned, the pandemic has really leveled and changed the playing field. There is a hiring frenzy. We all feel it since earlier in the spring, around March. Work has evolved. We've accelerated the digital business transformation that has brought on a change in demand for new skills, skills that people didn't necessarily have before. There's going to be a huge shift. Those are both functional, so technical skills, as well as leadership and soft skills. There will be a huge upskilling and reskilling effort going forward in order to meet the needs of tomorrow. In parallel, though, the workforce expectations have changed, both candidates and employees. Let's be honest, all of us, we're working remotely. We have proven that working remotely works. There are people who will want to have this as part of a benefit going forward. So we have to start thinking based on the new normal, looking for skill sets where people can, for example, manage remotely, can multitask, can do their job remotely. Some things may apply and some may not be able to be done remotely. If you're a bank teller, obviously you have to be present and on site. But I think some roles will have to be reevaluated. We've also had, we were talking about this earlier, a massive shift of people to different hometowns. There's been an exodus from major cities, either for cost concerns or taking care of family members. And a large part of that workforce is likely not going to return. So it's important, that we keep this in mind. What does that mean? You really have to focus not just on hiring faster, the quality of the candidates that you're bringing in, communicating better with candidates, but really focusing on that candidate experience, providing a superior experience to the candidates that are coming in, not just in terms of how they interact with you on the website, how they interact with you with hiring managers, with recruiters, and providing them with the tools and insight to understand how good a fit they are for the role and the kind of career paths that they can have in your organization. And I think the last consideration, as we all know, is one around diversity. The last year has brought on heightened focus on hiring for diversity, bringing on a diverse workforce that's more representative of sort of the community at large. So these are all things that are going to really change the way we attract candidates going forward.
Yeah, we're going to cover a lot of those topics. So thank you for setting that up. We're going to cover a lot of those topics in the discussion today. But, another thing that, SteFan, you and I talked about before is data privacy laws internationally. Give us 1 minute, how does that come into play here?
Yeah, and I think it's important when you're starting to expand your technology, start to get access to a lot larger data set that you may have never had at your disposal before, is really starting to think about how does that impact the way that you should be treating this data. From GDPR, CCPA, there's a lot of different regulations that we have in place now that are causing us to really start to think about being more diligent with how we're sending information around. Gone are the days of just being able to have a resume and just put it wherever you want to. PII is now really kind of a hot topic for a lot of different countries, and has no intention of really letting up anytime soon, as we're seeing with a lot of the pushes with Facebook and Google, and they are also moving in this direction.
Yeah, and this can become kind of a limit when you're trying to do talent attraction as well. There's not a lot of data. It's harder to both collect that data now. And so you kind of have an opportunity at this moment to start, I guess, kind of building your own LinkedIn, your own database of good, warm talent that you can continually hire from. And I know we'll dive into that a lot more. But, let's take on that first challenge that Lehi mentioned, right? That companies now need to hire faster, communicate faster and better, and they need to offer really a compelling experience, right? How can they actually do this? I mean, SteFan, as a practitioner, you've built this machine. We built this machine together with Postmates, right? Where talk us through that. What are some of those key factors?
I find myself building this machine a lot.
Yeah.
But no, I think it's for me, in the talent operations space, it's one of the most interesting problems to solve is how do you take an organization from a place where we're really kind of just checking the boxes to a place where we're trying to think about the future and scale as companies grow. And I think oftentimes some of the two most common things that people really kind of default to is, well, let's just hire more recruiters and sourcers. If we're growing, get more people to do the job. But I think a lot of what we don't factor in there is the ramp up time. Whether it's, in the role, to the technology, to just the culture of the company in general, there's a lot that has to go up into that in order to get these folks really to be able to produce. And then the other kind of more logical option is agencies. Let's just outsource this and kind of move from there. And the reality is that can be costly. If you have the budget, lucky you, but if you don't, it gets, that could take a good chunk of your budget that you could be allocating to other places that could be a little bit more strategic. So typically what I kind of like to think about is, a lot of the times you have a pretty this treasure trove of candidates right, accessible to you already in your ATS. And I really think it then becomes an opportunity for how can you leverage those individuals to really be able to deliver a better experience, but also quicker return and quicker time to fills. So, leveraging the technology allows you to resurface the candidates and not just, make it easy for you to search them, but also tell you which candidates are the most effective or can be the most effective or generate the highest ROI for a particular role are some of the things that you'd want to look at. You also need to learn how to be able to re-engage those candidates as well. Sending out emails, targeted messaging, marketing, all of that stuff will help you be able to build a relationship with your candidates. So that way you can make sure that if the opportunity doesn't exist now, when it does, that they're ready and they're hot for you.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I would say, it's, maybe a bit of a joke, but I think talent operations, there's a need for this role, whether it's, someone that you can just give dedicated space for them to be able to think about how do you scale an organization, about generating more efficiency. I personally see my job is, I'm successful when our recruiters and sourcers are as productive as possible. So just that be able to give space to the leadership team, to the recruiters, to not have to dig through all these little nuances and just have someone focus on it is usually also a great help.
That's great. Yeah. So, I agree. Like sourcing takes a while to ramp up, right? You've got good candidates in your ATS, but maybe it's hard to discover them. And then I know at least at Postmates, we worked on not only the employer brand that attracted them in, but we're building this database within Eightfold that, then you created sort of automated re-engagement campaigns as well. Right. And then I personally do agree that any company that's doing a significant amount of hiring needs a talent ops person that's constantly optimizing their systems. Right. Lahia or John, any other comments or anything to add on that? As far as advice for companies that are, taking on that challenge and how they could do it?
Yeah, I mean, I strongly agree with the point around talent operations. I think the overall thing we see with companies is that the default state that companies fall into is this kind of reactive firefighting thing. Where it's like, yeah, we posted the job, we got some candidates, somebody's got to schedule them, somebody's got to get some offers out, get some interviews scheduled, and everybody just runs around, and it's such a busy job, and there's so much urgency around close the next role that it's easy for companies just to fall into this just kind of chaos state or inconsistent, where you've got a recruiter who's just an absolute hero, who's having some success, but is like really getting burnt. And the real difference between those companies and the ones who kind of make the leap to getting really strategic and awesome and treating recruiting as a competitive advantage are the ones who can step back from the day-to-day noise and say, how do we upgrade how we build our candidate experience? How do we upgrade our data system so that we're actually generating data to be transparent and predictive of what's going to happen? And it's hard if you're a recruiter carrying a full load to do that. And so generally what we see is when a company steps back and hires SteFan and he says, hey, I'm not going to take on a load of recs to fill. I'm going to step back and say, how do we build this process? How do we do structured interviewing? Now we can start to get at our DE&I goals. That's where they actually make this big leap.
Yeah. And, and that's kind of what I love about Greenhouse, both as a user or when I was a TA leader, but also implementing it for clients, is that it kind of forces you to be more proactive. You have to actually set up what's the interview going to be? What are the competencies we're looking at before you even open the role, which is, sometimes you have to force organizations out of that reactive pattern. Right. And I feel like your software does that in a really compelling way. Lahia,
think about it, right? We're just trying to be the catalyst for change, right? Is that companies, it's hard to make that change. It's hard as a recruiter to go to the CTO and say, I know you've been hiring for 20 years, but we're going to do it differently. And so that's what the software's trying to do. Yeah.
And Lahia, same with Eightfold in this, right? How are you helping, customers like SteFan with that engagement, to keep the communication better within your platform?
Yeah, no, it's true. And I wanted to double down on something John said. I think it comes down to, it's a process, but it's also a process at scale, right? It's a lot easier when it's just one recruiter, you're a small company, you've got a few roles that you need to fill. But once you start looking at the whole organization, It's really about optimizing the process. It's really about tracking things, not just tracking your diversity goals, but tracking the process from candidate engagement all the way to, fill, to offer creation and fill. And so the role is really about looking for ways to optimize the process, not just for the candidate, but also for the hiring manager and the recruiter. And so, SteFan has a key role in figuring out and knowing what tweaks he can make, what technologies he can bring in to make the process a lot more effective.
That's so true. I mean, really, what I got to witness SteFan building, at Postmates was really the money ball. We've been talking about that, the money ball recruiting for so long, but and I remember early on implementing things like jobs to web and stuff when I was at SAP that were like 1.0 version of this. But now with open APIs, with the integrations that Eightfold and Greenhouse have, you really can know what's working, what's not in real time and adjust effectively. Fantastic. Well, great. I think a big part of talent attraction, especially now, is having compelling candidate experience. Something I tell my clients a lot and advise them on is candidate experience is your keystone habit as a talent acquisition organization. If you fundamentally focus just on this one metric, all your other ones improve, right? But what does it mean? What does it mean to have a great candidate experience? Jon?
Sure. So I think the first thing is people have to understand, what is the experience? And the point is, it's every touch point that candidate has. It's not just a career site, right? It's from the moment they learn your company exists, through the application process, through the interview process, and every interaction within that, through the offer, all the way through the first day and first couple of weeks. Every moment there is an opportunity to tell the story of why your company is great and why somebody would want to work there. And it's an opportunity to screw it up and have somebody decide they don't want to work for you. And so to do it well, part of it is understanding, what do we have to say? What is unique? What is the message we want to get through? But then two is, how do you systematically deliver that message to every candidate? And so when you're doing it where you just depend on I have this recruiter and she gets our message, so I trust it'll get through. Well, yeah, but a third of the interactions that the candidate has are with the recruiter, 2/3 with other people. And what happens when that person takes a day off? Now what happens to your message? So the point is, how do you construct and choreograph an experience that every touch point is optimized? So that every email, even though here's when your interview's coming up, hey, when are you available? Every single moment in there, you're doing well. So people talk a lot about automation. Automation can save so much time. It's yes, that's great from a recruiter perspective. You're going to save time. The actual real benefit is you're going to ensure process integrity. Every single time the candidate will have the experience you want them to have. And that's what I think people are ultimately trying to get to. So at scale, globally, you can deliver great candidate experiences every time.
Yeah, I think most people think automation is, I'm going to get a robot and just do it because we don't have time. But no, a lot of it's really about consistency, right, as well. SteFan, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's 100% spot on. I mean, for me, the way I look at automation is it's the part that comes after we've built the processes in the machine. And then we start to take a step back and say, okay, what part of this doesn't need to be driven by an actual individual? What part of this can we potentially automate to create that consistency across the board? And as opposed to really trying to bring in the automation to solve the problems, we figure out exactly how do we want this process to look like? What do we want to set up? And then drive from there. And then what you actually find is you end up creating this, these cycles in space for your recruiting team to be able to do a lot more. So yes, you might create more standardization. Some people usually think it's, everyone's getting the same, candid message and, it all feels, kind of spammy. Well, the reality is if you can take off some of those touch points, what you can actually do is allow your recruiters to give a little bit more of a white glove service to those candidates. And I think that's really where I like to focus on. I mean, if the machines can do that, the more of the monotonous stuff, then let's give our space to the recruiters to be able to deliver that, personalized experience whenever they can.
Yeah, and talk about that's recruiter retention right there, right?
Yes.
I know I've managed many recruiters in my career, and I've seen the burnout. Same thing with coordinators, right? On the team, those are sometimes, especially with high volume, it is monotonous, and you get tired of it. We should be automating those sort of repetitive tasks so that recruiters and coordinators go back to the human relationship building and really giving that white gloves are right on. Lahia, you mentioned earlier, you made a really important point about skills, right? That this is really, I think this is really important for companies today that are thinking about talent, right? Can you explain, like, what does it mean to hire for potential, and why an understanding of skills is so important when you're kind of building this machine?
Yeah, from both sides, both for the company as well as for the candidate. All of us know there's the old adage that you're hiring anybody, you're taking a 50-50 chance on them, right? Because the reality is you can go through an interview, you can try to assess potential, but you're kind of feeling your way through a series of questions that may or may not be appropriate to understand whether that person's actually going to succeed in the role and whether they're going to be successful at your company. You can typically assess what someone has done. All of us have been called by previous managers to do a job we did 5 years ago. All of us get flattered, but also annoyed, because it's like, why would I want to do that job I did 5 years ago? The hard part historically has been, as a hiring manager or an executive, to assess whether this person has this skill set, because unless they've worked with you before, you don't know what they're capable of. And that's the beauty of where AI comes in. We can assess based on a person's profile, essentially any missing skills, inferred skills based on their education, based on their career path, based on how quickly they've been promoted, the industries they've worked on, the types of companies they've worked for, because the AI is taking a look at the data in the aggregate across 1.4 billion profiles, and then comparing this candidate's profile to that, to give you a recommendation for things you should be looking for things they could potentially do, and how likely they are to succeed in a role like yours. And so it really helps guide the conversation for the hiring manager, and helps give you a better idea of who might be a better fit and who will likely succeed.
Yeah, that's great. And I just want to remind those watching, please do feel free to add in answers in the Q&A, and we'll get to them here in just a bit at the end.
Add something to that as well.
Yeah, please, Stefan, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I think about here is, for me, a good manager is an individual who's constantly thinking what the next step is for their employees. And, although we try our best to really learn all the potential career paths, we learn the employee, their skill sets, their passions as much as possible, we're inherently limited to our own knowledge set. And I think that's where the beauty of some of the technologies like Eightfold really comes in, is because it allows me to see skills at such scale and their relationships to each other that you can help build out this career path. So even beyond the candidate, you also have the capability to look at something like this for your own internal employees. And again, coming back to retention and in the environment we are today, it's definitely a huge opportunity and a huge win for a lot of people.
Yeah, and to build on that, there's also the benefit for the candidate, because using the Eightfold technology, rather than do the pray and apply to everything on a website. We've all had candidates like that who applied to 23 things. The technology will actually propose to you, based on you dropping in your resume, hey, here's some potential career paths for you, not just for this role, but 2 roles from now. So, if somebody we could say, this is something that may be out of your career path today, but you might want to consider. And by the way, here's some things that you can do to upskill yourself, whether they're courses, whether they are groups, projects they could join. So, we really use that technology both internally for employees as well as for candidates and for the hiring managers as they're making those calls.
I love that. And what a great candidate experience, and what a time saver, right? Because I know when we were building out, the narrative for the Postmates career site, that widget, that Eightfold widget, it's as simple as dropping a resume. And then all of a sudden the career site shifts to just roles that match your skill set. It's huge time saver. And it does. It stops. I think it stopped candidates from going in and just spraying their resume on every possible job they think was a fit. It allowed the AI to really say, no, I'm looking at your skill set. I'm looking at your career path. And here's the roles that are really going to give you that next step up in your career. Just fantastic. I'm just so geeked out that technology like this is finally here. I've been dreaming about it for so long. It's fantastic. I want to shift over and talk a little bit about diversity and equity and inclusion in this. This is something I know, Stefan, it was a big goal when we were building out the employer brand at Postmates. And it was really that combination of the strategy and EVP that we built out with you, but also the tech stack to measure all the way through with Greenhouse and Eightfold that allowed us to achieve, some pretty amazing numbers and goals, right? We increased female applicants by 93%. We increased underrepresented minorities by 33% in a single year by combining the strategy plus this technology, right? And so, this has become a critical topic that's being discussed within every C-suite, right? And part of every recruiting plan right now. The number, I actually looked, the number one landing page on my company's website is our diversity statement. The number one, because people are out there searching like how to do this. And we actually launched a whole service just around helping companies build out their internal DEI programs, right? Because this is, our clients have been asking for it. So, with that, how can companies be thinking about this topic, and how can they be, most importantly, like, using technology to help them achieve these objectives? SteFan?
Yeah, I mean, I think, step one is really just giving it the space to think about it, really making a priority for your company, and getting the buy-in from, your affinity or ERG groups, getting the buy-in from your C-suite, making sure everyone knows that this is a priority, because it should be at the end of the day. And I think from there, the conversation can very easily switch into where can we start to identify where our problems are, and then fill those in with particular solutions. So I think this is where, when I think about Greenhouse, when I think about Eightfold, the huge value they had for us is they allowed us to lift up the cover and really see what was going on. The information we were collecting as part of our applications and the EOC questions, we weren't able to really leverage them in the way that we would want to. But then now, piecing in Eightfold, we were able to see what our pipelines were looking like, what our pass-through rates were pushing through. And then from there, we're able to dig in even deeper and start to look at our actual, for particular roles, what were those, where our Greenhouse scorecards looking at? Were we having any imbalance at any particular point? So we're able to dig down that next layer down and really kind of drive a lot more value. So really what I'm trying to say is, like, what these technologies allows you to do is get data points that you may have never had before. And because the reality is, like, you're ingesting so much information, to be able to really digest and analyze it the way you want to can be difficult without any sort of technological support.
Yeah. And to be honest, like, not only was this informing your recruiting operations projects and what you were doing as you're kind of tinkering and building your recruiting operations, but I can just say, like, as a vendor that was supporting you in this, right. It added to our experience as well, because I'm getting data back on real campaigns that we're running and things that I just don't get from other clients because you had this setup. I mean, it was amazing. Like, the case study we were able to do just wouldn't have been possible if you hadn't built this type of recruiting operation, right? It's just, so it doesn't just improve your own talent. It improves you getting the best ROI out of your partners as well, which is just fantastic. Speaking of which, Jon, anything to add in there?
Sure. I mean, I think I'd echo a lot of what SteFan said. I think, we're seeing a lot with our customers when we talk to them is that, good intentions aren't enough, right? A lot of companies have developed good intentions recently, but ultimately, like, you have to make systemic change. You have to change how you work. And so what we see is we talk about data and, like, oh, we can inspect things. If you don't actually have, like, a consistent process that you're running, the data is really hard to understand if there is data at all. And so the three-step process we see people do is you structure your process so that every candidate's having the same experience and you can actually see what's happening. Number two is you interrogate that process. And you say, well, geez, how come at this one stage, men are passing at twice the rate as women? How come when we look at who's applying for this specific job, that it's so unbalanced for this one job? What are we doing differently to source? And you have to be curious and go figure out. And so we're watching it happen within our own company, where department by department, they're, managers and recruiters sitting down and going through the data and saying, how come, like, our, apply rate is 50-50 on gender, but the hires are 60-40? Where's that happening? And the third step is you've got to go interject and say, well, what can we do differently? Is it that the way that we're interviewing is introducing some bias, maybe the specific attributes that we're testing for, maybe it's who's doing the interviews? You have to be open to, like, what those things are. But ultimately, it's about, we run these consistent processes over and over again, and then we try to measure them and say what's wrong and what can we change about it. And so that's ultimately what we're trying to build within Greenhouse, is to make it easy to do those things.
Yeah, and I feel like we've kind of been here before. I think it was like 2014, 2015. This became, a big thing, and you saw C-suite kind of come down with sort of hiring goals around diversity. There's been a lot of, like, some virtue signaling and things like that. it needs to be more than just creating a goal around it. It really needs to be like what you guys are saying. And Lahia, like how, you know, how can AI maybe even help prevent unconscious bias, or making sure that you're just focusing on the right goals rather than just sort of making them up out of thin air, right?
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, we're human, we're biased by nature. We're not going to help ourselves, just like Jon says, even if we have the best intentions. And so, you know, the reality is relying on a technology like AI. You know, we built equal opportunity algorithms. We can actually mask and have the engine ignore certain information about candidates. So we kind of blind all these types of attributes, gender, race, so that we can race and age, so we can actually level the playing field. And you're actually evaluating candidates against each other based on skill set and potential, what they've accomplished in the past and what they're capable of doing, and whether or not they're a fit for your company. And those attributes, you know, around diversity get unmasked much later in the process. So, you know, we are constantly testing our engine to make sure that the recommendations are unbiased and that they're sound, and providing those recommendations directly to the recruiters, the candidates, as well as the hiring managers. You know, and providing that all the way through to reporting.
Yeah. SteFan, anything to add there?
Yeah, actually, I was thinking back to our Postmates days, and you know, one of the things that really kind of made this whole thing real for me was, you know, you hear it, but then once you look at the data and you see that, you know, this disparity between demographics, between ethnicity really does exist in your organization, it's hard for you to not want to do something about it. And then it's, you know, a lot of times you can constantly justify these, you know, this disparity with things like, oh, well, that talent pool doesn't exist, or, you know, there's not as many of them applying. And when we did this exercise at Postmates, what we realized was that, you know, using the AI that's built into Eightfold, we were able to establish a baseline of everyone who's a 4 or 5, you know, star match for our role, and then look at those by demographic and see what the pass-through rates were for each one. And we actually saw that when all things were consistent, when you say that this is what good talent looks like, we actually saw a pretty significant drop when we started to move to more underrepresented individuals. And what that allowed us to do was take a step back and saying, is there something that we're doing on our side, whether conscious or unconscious, that we're actually preventing talent that should be passing through this stage from being able to get there? And it was just those kind of questions that, you know, allowed us to raise and really make some change. We are able to balance that out almost exactly across the board in less than a quarter. So it's a beauty of some of this technology that you can do, you know, some of these things.
That's amazing, because, you know, the old way was you had to either, you know, survey candidates on their experience to get some of this feedback, or you had to, you know, manually download data and try to match it up, or, you know, look at Glassdoor at your reviews or something like that, right? And then try to figure it out. Maybe that candidate will get on the phone with you and tell you. But it seems like with this system, the data can start telling you where to go dig to find the problems and say, oh, okay, maybe this engineering team really needs some more some unconscious bias training, or, you know, we need to rethink this process because we're finding reasons not to hire people rather than reasons to hire, right? Like it's amazing that we're here, right? And so any other things you want to add, Lahia or Jon?
I feel like the other dimension that we're starting to hear more and more people talk about goes back to the previous question that Lahia was talking about around skills, is that more and more, you know, everything we're talking about here starts from like this job description, and you go off and you source people, and then you interview people based on it. And then you dig under and you say, well, how did you come up with this job description? How did you choose these skills or traits that you're looking for? And people are like, I was in a hurry. I just went to Indeed and looked at my competitor and found their role and copy and pasted it and put it in my system. And it turns out like it's frequently very unconsidered, right? People didn't hire a management consultant to do a whole survey of their existing company and figure out what are the actual things you need. They just kind of threw some stuff up there that sounded good. And the truth is, every attribute you put on that job description is going to change who applies. It's going to change who actually gets through the system or who gets through your process. And so I think there's a whole nother layer of data that we'll be able to expose eventually to show you like the implications of the job description you're creating.
Oh God, I say it all the time. It's the most important recruitment marketing document you have, but it's the most ignored. as well. It's just copy and pasted. I've even seen companies where, they even forgot to remove the name of the company whose job description they copied it from on Indeed or something. It's just, I still to this day don't understand it. Right. Like why? Because it's literally the first thing people see. Yeah. SteFan, you look like you had something to add there. No?
Yeah, no, I think that's one of those, things. And I think part of the reason why it's such a problem is it's such a massive change management exercise. You have to get everyone to believe the importance of it. And otherwise you create all the job descriptions yourself. And I mean, who has the bandwidth to do that, let alone knows all these different jobs to be able to do that.
And that's what we did at Postmates. What we did was create some really great guides, based on the EVP narrative, did some great guides and some structure. And so the hiring managers who just want to put in sort of skills requirements, right? Like it even prompted and taught them how to write a good job description as they're writing it in the template within Greenhouse, right? What was the effect of that? Like, what did you see? Like after we did those guides and we launched them, did you start seeing more consistent job descriptions, more, hiring managers writing better job descriptions?
Yeah, I mean, technology like Greenhouse allowed us to embed that directly at the job creation phase, and we almost forced that behavior. Now, that being said, you're always going to have those like, where did you get that bullet from? You sure that's what we want to say there kind of thing? But I think that's where also pairing with Eightfold was also kind of a great option, because what we were able to do with the career side was we could tell individuals that, hey, you're a strong match for this job. Regardless of what the job description says and what you feel about that job description as far as your capabilities, you're a strong match. And that just had the combination of those two has such a massive impact on our diversity initiatives. I think we saw like a 91% increase in female applications. Like it was just massive, just to be able to tell people up front, just like, hey, you should apply to this. You meet all the criteria, as opposed to making people think and decipher your Rubik's Cube of a job description.
And let's face it, that's broken on both sides. We don't have the time as hiring managers to write good job descriptions, and candidates aren't reading them. Let's not fool ourselves. How many people apply for jobs that you think, why have you applied for this? You're not a fit. So that's the beauty of the AI, right? Because we do away with that problem, and rather than force people to rewrite job descriptions or read them, we kind of just make the match for you.
That's true. Though it might be just past experience where they read the job descriptions and they didn't glean a whole lot from them, or they're terribly written, and then, or they go through an interview process and then the job changes because the company didn't know what they wanted, right? Because they didn't fill out their competencies beforehand and really think about it.
And by the way, but in the same boat, resumes are also broken. Resumes are also really poorly written and aren't really a great assessment. I was talking to a recruiter this morning who said, oh, I'm going to send you stuff, but they won't have updated it. And I laughed. Someone told me we're doing away with the resume. So again, both sides of the equation are not really well addressed.
So true. But maybe we can start in recruiting and start making the experience a little better on our side, and maybe it bleeds into the candidate behaviors as well. Fantastic. Well, we've touched today on hiring efficiently and quickly through automation, candidate experience, hiring based on skills and DE&I. These aren't magic ideas. These are literally things, for those that are tuning in, that you can actually do today, right? SteFan has actually done all this as well. And the reason we are on this panel is that he's been able to build this kind of recruiting environment working with all three of us, right? And so, with Greenhouse, Eightfold, Practical Talent, SteFan, can you talk to us about how are you able to achieve this overall? Like, bring it together for those who are listening. Like, why was this the right combination of partners to come in and help you build that right, that right recruiting operation and strategy that resulted in all those great results we shared earlier?
Yeah, I mean, I think really, and I'll dig into this deeper, but really at the summary is you need to kind of meet an organization where they are, and then be able from there take them to where you want them to be in the future. So the way I kind of really treat that is I really like to sit down with the stakeholders, whether that's the recruiters leads, the business partners, anyone who plays a part in this, and I want to understand really what is the problems that they're facing. What is it that, they wish they could change if they could change anything? because understanding their pain really, and and their past behaviors really allows you to build an organization or a machine that can really kind of pump out quality. And I think to that point, it really is about getting that buy-in, showing people what the future can look like, not just simply like, hey, this is what we're doing, but like, hey, let me show you what a CRM can be if you didn't have to create your own segments. Hey, let me show you what your applications would look like if we started branding ahead of time as opposed to waiting for folks entering the funnel. Let me show you what our interview process could look like if it's built in and we run it systematically through everyone else. And showing them what that future really kind of helps them realize they're like, oh, okay, I wasn't thinking about it like that. But also shows them how easy of a lift that this can be, and then how you don't necessarily have to think about this as this overly complicated mechanism of pieces. But then I think the last thing really there I would say is you got to find great partners. You have to find technology that solves those problems, and you have to find technologies with teams that can support you in your needs. So I mean, for me, whenever I'm assessing, I'm really thinking about, okay, have we checked all the boxes on my pain point list? And then simultaneously, have we, what is that I want to, where do we want to take this organization going forward? And can these technologies, can these vendors help me get there? And then the last piece is, are they going to be a partner with me? I'm looking for thought partners. I'm not looking for individuals that are just going to help me put in a piece of technology, because at the end of the day, this talent thing is always evolving. Pandemics happening out of nowhere, and next thing you know, you have to go virtual. So, making sure you have great partnerships is, a hugely important part of this as well. And luckily enough, I've worked with some great vendors, as you can see here. So I'm hugely appreciative for that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we really bonded over that. Building an employer brand strategy with you at Postmates was really a convenience brand, and then all of a sudden, the pandemic happening and us having to shift that and really start telling the story of you being essentially an essential service was awesome, and it was really great working with you and the folks at Greenhouse and Eightfold to build that machine. Any other last thoughts before we jump into questions, Jon or Lahia? Awesome. That's great. We added another extra 2 minutes for our Q&A. Do we have a moderator? Let me look. Actually, I think I can go in here and see. Here we go. Hey, SteFan, you kind of make it seem easy. Like, how do you actually get companies to change their behavior? Right? Maybe Jon, maybe you take this one, because you actually wrote the book on this. But like, how does someone like SteFan, maybe there's another recruiting ops person listening to this webinar right now, right? Actually get them to see that vision.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say the reason we wrote the book is really related to that question. Is one of our findings was that more and more we're seeing business leaders, right? Your head of engineering, your head of sales, your CEO are saying like, wow, the only way I can be successful in my job is if we hire well. And yet they don't know what their role is, right? And they're used to just saying, well, recruiters, like, do it. And now, like, do it faster and better. And it's like, no. Like, we need a shared vision of what does success look like? What does great hiring look like? What does it look like where SteFan works, right? Because most like head of engineering don't know what it looks like, and they don't realize what their role is in it, because they have a really important role to play, as does the recruiter. And so that was the point of like writing this whole thing down, was to make sure that everybody's aligned on what does great look like, and what am I going to do as a leader, and what's the recruiter going to do as my partner. So that's what we're trying to get at.
No, that's great. We actually had a really good question just come through. It says, do you find diversity is typically a sourcing issue or a selection issue? SteFan, you want to dive on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a fantastic question. I mean, I think it really can be both. I personally see that, typically where people struggle the most is at the selection portion of it. As you start to move down the pipeline, interestingly enough, for companies that I've worked with and I had the ability to see this data, as you get to the later portions of the funnel, things start to balance out a little bit more. And I think that's because everyone are starting to get to the point where they realize they need to start thinking about diversity more and thinking about how, they can be more inclusive in the process. But earlier in the funnel, I think that's usually where most of the problems happen. You have, people that are identifying as white or Caucasian, making it, pass-through rates of, 38, 40%, whereas people identifying as underrepresented minority groups are hitting anywhere from like 16 to 18%. And, it could be because we're thinking about, certain companies that we want to hire from, or certain skills that we need, instead of thinking about the potential that a candidate could potentially have. So that's kind of what I see there.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was gonna add to what SteFan is saying, because we've had this very conversation with a couple other customers, and it was interesting. I had a customer say that what they found out, that it was a bit of both, and you have to identify for each company sort of where the biggest crux of the issue is, but it's a bit of both. And he said to me, what we found on the sourcing side is when we were saying, well, we're only going to hire from these universities, for example, or we're only going to hire from these companies, in itself, you may be shutting out or closing out opportunities to hire from maybe universities that have more underrepresented minorities, as an example, or companies that have historically also hired underrepresented minorities. So it really is a bit of both.
Yeah, I feel like most companies are they first go to sourcing as issue because it's easier to measure. Yeah. Like what percentage are we sourcing and putting in front of hiring managers that are diverse, right? But it's the selection issue is hard to see unless you have good data for it, right, John?
Can I make a more cynical point?
Go for it.
I mean, obviously, I think you guys are exactly right that like it differs by company and differs by job. And sometimes it's a sourcing issue and sometimes it's a selection issue. What I see a lot of times, though, is people immediately go to the sourcing issue because it allows them to place the problem outside of their walls.
And they can control.
There's the reason we're not hiring more women engineers is because they're just not out there. They're not applying. What do you want from me? Mm-hmm. And it's really common that when you look into their data, you're like, yeah, you're right. There are less women engineers than men. Maybe it's 70-30 of who's applying. And when I look at who's getting hired, it's 90-10.
Yeah.
So if you were just to hire the demographics of your applicant pool, you'd have a wildly different looking company. And I think there's a lot of folks who immediately go to the sourcing thing because it's easier to understand and say, well, it's not my fault. What do you want from me? And yet when you dive in and you look at the pipeline of what's actually happening, it's incredibly common that you don't have like perfect parity through the pipeline.
No, I totally agree. And there's some really great questions coming through here, by the way. And I want to get through them but that was a great discussion, but it also has to do with diversity. And this was SteFan and Lahia, you both talked about boosting diversity hiring with technology. Does that really happen? Why does that work?
Go ahead.
I can take this one. All right. Yeah, I mean, I think we did a presentation for Eightfold on this. This really works. I mean, we saw, beyond the straight, how many hires we had, just the population growth through the entire funnel was hugely impacted. And also our attraction, our ability to be more attractive to these particular demographics which obviously has a huge impact on our number of hires. I think simply just there was a lot of focus we had on around kind of our play was at Postmates was serving the candidate just like we would serve you up your burrito kind of situation, and moving into that mindset really allowed us to change. But to do that wasn't just simply like, hey, let's just come up with cool branding, even though we had some really cool branding. It was also really creating technology that can help us create that aspect. So doing the work for the candidate, telling them what roles they were strong for, providing them the information they're looking for when they're looking for it, as opposed to having them search all over your career site. Being as transparent as possible, using some of the automation within Greenhouse to be able to provide them information at particular stages. Like it had such an impact on our overall experience. Now, it's not going to solve, your interviewers and the questions they're asking in their interviews, in at least not 100%. You can provide, standardized questions and stuff like that, but it does have an ability to increase the top of the funnel, which will inevitably increase at the bottom as well.
Nice. Right. And obviously this is a very hot topic because this is, I'm seeing a theme in some of these questions, but right. This next one was any tips on improving diversity, like improving the hiring of, let's say, people outside of some of the traditional underrepresented groups, but like people who are autistic or on the spectrum, right? Is there a way that this, building this type of modern machine can help with that? Or do you just have some tips outside of that?
I got a little bit here too as well. So I mean, neurodiversity is something that's kind of been, I've really been looking to and trying to figure out what solutions we have potentially there. I think this is one of the areas where the capabilities model, the skills model can really start to shine, because we're often thinking about, you need to have this sort of background, or you need to do the role in this particular type of way. When in reality, it's, having that ability to just have a skill set that is leaning toward that role can really open up a lot of doors. I think really what it is too is getting people to start to think differently about their roles. And it's not just, in this world right now, you don't necessarily need to be in person. And we're realizing that across the board. Some roles that we thought needed to have high engagement or like a lot of contact can be done kind of a little bit more, with less touch points. And I really think that is opening up a lot of opportunities for, groups that may have been historically neglected for these roles. So it's, again, I'm not going to claim to have the solution here, but some of the things that we've been seeing to help us out in this area have been focused.
I think you're onto something, which was the basis of, I think, how we built out our platform. Understand that we have to change our traditional models of looking at things. So for example, question some of it, requiring a 4-year degree, only looking at Ivy League schools. There are plenty of underrepresented minorities, I'm going to say people in general, who may not have had the means potentially to go to an expensive school, who only went to community college, or for personal reasons maybe never went to college, but really has the potential to succeed in a specific role based on the types of jobs that they have taken. And so, I think part of it is going back and maybe opening the aperture, allowing for others who may not be an exact fit for the mold of that narrow box for which you've defined the job description, to be included. And then see where they fall out. It really is going to change the way we think about roles, the way we think about people, and maybe start leveling the playing field to start thinking based on potential and what they've accomplished and demonstrated.
Absolutely. And I think especially when you're talking about, neurodiversity or even people who are on the spectrum, when I was a TA leader at SAP and I was building their global employer brand, we built a whole program around hiring people on the spectrum. They were one of the, I think, leading case studies of doing this, because what we started to find out was for certain QA roles, the aspects that come along with folks with that particular neurodiverse diversity is that, they're fiercely loyal, very analytical. They don't play politics or get the emotions in it that can slow productivity down. Like, they're really great workers. And so what we started to think about is like, what are the roles that just this neurodiverse type of mind does really well with? And then just kind of even say, we want to hire folks with that type of background into these roles, So I think there's ways to really tackle this and look at it, not just of how do we change the role to fit the person, but how do we think about the person that's going to fit really well into the role,
Yeah. I think the point there, the thing I'd add at the end is like, ultimately, I think what companies are finding is it's a competitive advantage. If you're able to find this pool of talent who other companies are going to overlook for whatever historical biases, and you're like, no, these are really talented.
It's like a superpower.
Yeah. And I think and one that a lot of people have been talking about recently is like women over 50 who've been out of the workforce, who are like, I can't come into the office that many hours, but I'm more to work from home. It's like, there's this rich vein of talent there. And if you can build roles that fit what they want, it's like, it's such a huge competitive advantage to be able to work with these folks?
Absolutely. I got a friend, his wife, was out of work for 5-6 years raising their children. They would try to get back, and it took months, right? But then one startup was like, okay, yeah. And she now runs all of HR for this fast growing startup. She's just this great hire. And it's like, how many dozens of companies missed out on the opportunity to have her there, right? It's just things like that. We got to think differently.
Right? Another great example, we did the Veterans Challenge at Eightfold. All the veterans were able, it's one where it's the classic example. You're looking at, anybody who's been in the military. It doesn't actually, going back to civilian work, it doesn't actually translate directly. It's very hard for the human eye to discern, wow, you might be really good. And yet they have amazing leadership skills and soft skills. And this is the reason we aced the Veterans Challenge. We're able to actually provide and include them as they return to the civilian workforce to find roles that they're going to succeed at and actually be a great fit for.
Yeah. Now, SteFan, some of these last questions, they all pick at you. Are you ready? All right. They really want to know about you and your role. The first one is, SteFan, how do you see the ops role gaining prominence, and what do you define as success in your role as a recruiting ops leader?
I think maybe not to be too selfish. I hope it continues to gain even more prominence because more job opportunities,
Foundational.
Yeah. I love Noom. I'm not leaving. But I think it really is it's people are starting to wake up to the idea that we could be working more effectively. We could be working more efficiently. We could be doing things a lot easier as opposed to, the way that, HR in general has been working historically. And I think with that, it's kind of tough for any individual to manage a rec load while simultaneously trying to figure out the process, while simultaneously trying to talk to candidates. And having that individual who can take a step back and say, okay, what does the whole machine look like? How do the systems connect to each other? What is the information that we want to get out of this in order for us to be able to drive the business need that we want to be able to see? And I think really when I kind of think about what is important, where that's going to go is, having that individual, you can call them talent ops, talent enablement, whatever it is, it's just creating the space for an individual to be able to kind of step back and look at the organization is really going to be, people are going to realize that it can add so much value. I've actually had conversations with my bosses, like, how do you, to the exact point around, how do we measure ourselves? I look at it as how much productivity can I generate? How much productivity can I help the recruiting team generate? If we were making, 1.8 hires per quarter by resource, how can I step in and help to raise that? Is that, whether I invest, some of my time toward the employer brand into using our technology as efficiently as possible, automating offer letters, for instance, or simply bringing a new technology that removes some of the tasks that the recruiters are managing and allowing them to take more phone screens. Really, that's kind of what I see as mine, but I think there's really no, it's such a new space. No one's really kind of pinned it down just yet.
Got it.
I think,
all right. Yeah, go, John.
I think the argument I've seen land is if you talk to the C-suite and you say, so your sales funnel, right? Like you have all these expectations that it's gonna be predictable and you can forecast what's gonna happen and it's transparent, like what's actually happening. And if it doesn't go well, you can hold somebody accountable. And they're like, yes, exactly. And they're like, well, I want that same thing out of the recruiting funnel. I wanna know, are we gonna hit our numbers or not? And if not, why not? I want to hold somebody accountable. They go, yes, exactly. I want the exact same thing on my recruiting funnel to get on my sales funnel. Like, okay, so tell me about your sales operations team, your revenue operations team. And what's the size of that versus your HR operations team? Because usually like 10-1 or like 10-0. And people go, oh, right. It's kind of unrealistic for me to have the same expectations if I don't fund that operations team. It's like, right. That's what you're getting at. Because usually they've gotten why they have a sales ops team.
Absolutely. Awesome. Well, I just want to thank all of you for joining and having, this has been, I could literally geek out with you all. Some of my favorite technologies, one of my favorite recruiting ops leaders all day long, but our time has expired right on time. So thank you so much. And for those of you watching, you can check out, request a demo of Greenhouse or Eightfold right on their websites. Feel free to check out a lot of our strategic services that help implement these technologies for you as well and build the strategy behind it at proactivetalent.com.
And
Thank
we
you guys.
invite everybody to cultivate the Eightfold
yeah.
Customer Summit coming up August 10th and 11th. We'll definitely continue the conversation there with SteFan, Will, and Jon.
Awesome. We'll see you at Cultivate. That's going to be so fun. And this is your first.
It's our first
user
customer
conference.
summit. It's going to be virtual, just because of restrictions right now, but we hope to take it on the road soon.
Awesome. Fantastic. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay.